So here's the plan for this lesson. I am going to show you 3 harmonic concepts that Ravel employed, and at the end I am going to show you how I apply them over a well-known jazz standard. This is all practical stuff, so be sure to stick with me. And I want to get started with a composition that many might have heard influenced John Coltrane to compose giant steps. And I'm referring specifically to a passage from Ravel's Ondine. Now, we know for a fact that Slonimsky, that is Nicholas Slonimsky, was a definite influence on Coltrane, but I don't know if he ever mentioned this piece by Ravel. But chances are he was familiar with it, as we will soon discover. Just listen to this excerpt on piano from Ondine. If you can't quite hear it, listen again with me playing the Giant Steps melody over it. It's almost like a minor version of the 3-tonic center progression in Giant Steps. Let me explain how Coltrane might have used it. This, by the way, only takes place around measure 70. And you'll see above the music that I've analyzed the chords that result from the arpeggio being played by the piano. And yes, there are a few notes here and there that do not belong to the chord, but that is a dissonance that very quickly resolves each time and adds to the overall effect of tension and release that Ravel intended. So the first chord is a B minor 9. And right off the bat, we can begin to see and hopefully hear what Coltrane did. He initially might have used the relative major of the key. Same notes, but different bass. And you'll see that I wrote the Coltrane adaptation for Giant Steps above Ravel's chords. So the relative major of B minor is, of course, D major. Interestingly enough, we know that Giant Steps begins with B major, which is instead the parallel major of B minor. Who knows, he might have just used the parallel major from the get-go. However, for the purposes of this analysis, if we want to easier understand how Giant Steps relates to Ravel's Ondine, let's examine it as the relative major, which is diatonic to it. Now, moving on, in the second beat, Coltrane would have added a dominant that introduces the modulation from D to the second tonic, which is B flat major. Of course, Ravel just goes directly from the B minor to G minor on the third beat. And what we have here is the descending cycle of major thirds. On the fourth beat, Coltrane would add a dominant, in this case C-sharp 7, which resolves to the F-sharp major on the next measure. And note that Ravel on beats 3 and 4 introduces 2 F-sharp 7s, that is dominant chords, to return to the beginning of the cycle with B minor. And of course, Coltrane on Giant Steps starts the cycle again in a totally different key. So I'll let you be the judge. Was Coltrane primarily inspired by Ravel or just Slonimsky to compose Giant Steps? Before I move on, I want to mention that something I was inspired to do from this analysis is to take Coltrane changes and instead of using the original major chords, use the entire minors. So in other words, change it back to Ravel's concept. Just 3 minor chords through the cycle of descending major thirds. So there are many ways of resolving this progression. For example, let's resolve it to a minor chord. Let's try it to major. And there, of course, I'm doing it over the major third cycle when I'm descending, but you can also experiment with the minor third cycle. For example, or even more Ravelian if you do. Later I will show you how I use this Ravel concept over a standard. Now I want to show you another very cool passage, this time from Valses Noblesse et Sentimentales. God, I know I probably butchered the French. Anyhow, listen to this progression through the cycle of fifths. It might not sound like much if you don't hear it in a specific context, but for now, let me just say that this is a very useful progression because we can use portions of it as a turnaround. Let's analyze it and we'll see that it's got some interesting features. By the way, this is a piano part and the clefs are not visible. So the bottom staff is F clef and top is G clef. If you look at the bass, it is progressing through the cycle of fifths starting on D and goes through all 12 keys. It uses various enharmonics, but in essence we have D, G, C, F, B flat, E flat, G sharp or A flat, C sharp or D flat, F sharp or G flat, B, E, and A. Now, if you look at the very top note starting at the beginning, you'll see that it ascends chromatically with each chord change. So if I were to adapt it to play on guitar, just these two lines, the bass and top note, it would sound something like this. And it really starts to get interesting when we examine the chord voicings that are featured in this progression. This is in 3/4 time. So in the first measure we have what we can call a D2, then a G7 sharp 9, and on the third beat a very special chord. This is the one that really adds the spice to the progression. The root here, of course, is C, but what flavor is it? Major, minor, or dominant? Notice that we have an E, so we know it's major. We also have a B flat, so we know it's a dominant. But then on the top note, we have a B natural. What on earth is going on, you might wonder? 2 sevenths, a minor seventh and a major seventh? Well, enharmonically speaking, maybe, but theoretically speaking, no. I know this is one that is going to throw a lot of you off. If you think upper extensions only include ninths, 11ths, and 13ths, you are wrong. They go all the way up to a 23rd. Yep. And in this case, that B natural is a 21st. So the chord is a C7 21 or C7 21st. A good friend of mine calls it an adult chord. And it sure sounds like one too. The reason you might not be familiar with it is because it is very rare in functional harmony, but perfectly normal in chromatic or non-functional harmony. And I know many of you are probably wondering how I arrived at the number 21 for this extension. But because this would take a lengthy explanation, I promise you I will devote an entire lesson in the near future to show you the theory behind these adult chords and how they are used. For now, let's move on to the next measure. Here we have an F minor 7 on the first beat, a B flat 7 sharp 9 on the second beat, and on the third beat this time, an E flat 7 21 or 21st. The next measure has a G sharp minor 7 on beat 1, a C sharp 7 sharp 9 on beat 2, and an F sharp 7 21st on the third beat. So you'll notice that Ravel places the most dissonant chord on the last beat of each measure and quickly resolves it on the downbeat of the next one. And the key phrase here is quickly resolves. That's one of the reasons it works. The other is the fact that it is part of a chromatic moving line, and we can resolve almost any dissonance chromatically. For example, a fourth, when it acts as a suspension on a major chord, it will resolve by half step down or chromatically down to a major third. Enough said, it's time to move on to the final measure in this progression where we have a B minor on the first beat, an E7 sharp 9 on the second beat, and an A7 sharp 9 on the third beat. So, now that you have a better idea of what's going on here, let me show you how I would adapt it to use on guitar. So here's the adult chord, the dominant 21st. But if we hear it in context, it doesn't sound so bad. It actually sounds interesting. So you can use it in different ways. I want to show you one last quick concept and then demonstrate how I would use all of this stuff over a well-known standard. But before continuing, I want to tell you about the download for this lesson. It includes the materials for both lessons in this two-part series. That is PDFs with all the examples and theory, most of which feature regular notation as well as tablature. I include a total of 8 notated examples of standards using Ravel's diminished major 7, which I covered in the first lesson. Also the sus4 major 7 chord and its application. Unfortunately, there was no time for this one. Ravel's chords and fifths, which are coming up. Impressionist turnarounds using Ravel's chords. MP3s of everything and many more concepts that I could not fit into these 2 lessons. And you can download this info-filled study package for a nominal contribution from jazzguitar.richiezeland.com/premium, and you will find a direct link in the info section below. The third concept I want to show you here is Ravel's use of chords in fifths. And this is from the prelude to Ravel's The Tomb of Couperin. This is one of my favorite Ravel compositions, and I featured most of the examples in part 1 from this piece. But here you can see on the first beat this chord, which consists of several stacked ascending perfect fifths. Here it is with C in the root, followed by G, followed by D, and finally A. And this prelude, by the way, features lots of what we can call quintal harmony. But as far as using the specific voicing, the key here is to arpeggiate it and resolve by voice leading the top note chromatically to the top note of the resolution chord or the melody note. Let me show you how I use it. So this is the original chord. And there's several ways to use it. I like to arpeggiate it. Or just so many ways that you can resolve it. And like I promised at the beginning, I am now going to show you how I apply these concepts in a jazz setting. And to do so, I am going to improvise freely over the changes to All the Things You Are. Keep in mind that when we apply this stuff to a piece of music based on functional harmony, we begin to temporarily extend the music into some distant, unrelated tonalities. The key is not to remain distant for more than one or two measures and to voice lead chromatically back to a resolution chord in the original progression. And you will see that that's what I do throughout this improvisation. Personally, if you are going to improvise, I find it easier to use the concepts here in a rubato fashion within maybe a solo introduction. I don't know if you heard some of the Rebellion influences in there. I did my best to use most of them. If you go back and listen, you'll notice that they usually work as a turnaround to a given chord or take the place of a dominant. And that's because music is tension and release. So here I am simply creating added tension by substituting the dominant with one of these Ravel concepts and then resolving it back to a target chord in the original progression. And final advice for a stronger resolution is to try and resolve, if possible, to a third or seventh in the melody note. For those of you who are still with me, as usual, I appreciate your likes, comments, and welcome your questions. And if it's your first time on this channel and you enjoyed this lesson, be sure to subscribe. Also, special thanks to Walter Sá in Brazil for his great editing on my videos. And I look forward to bringing you another info-filled lesson very soon. Until then, you know my advice. Practice, practice, practice. And if you want to make it to Carnegie Hall, well, call an Uber. May peace be with you.